Welcome to session 16 of the Law of One. This session is going to be, for me, very memorable, not only because of the length of the session, but also because of my new guardian angel that was just harvested recently. So let's begin. So, as I mentioned, session 16 is pretty long. It has over 60 questions, and we're going to talk about the confederation of planets, Bible references, astronomy, synchronicities, cattle mutilation even, and a bunch of other cool stuff that I want to share with you guys. So, because of that, I had to split it in 4 videos. So, we're going to cover that over the course of the month of October. So, that's basically what we have today. We're going to talk about quarantine on the planet, which we have talked about before. So let's get into the first question so we don't extend this more than it should be. And the first question we have is from Don, of course, asking, I would like to ask, considering the free will distortion of the Law of One, how can the Guardians quarantine the Earth? Is this quarantine within the free will distortion? Ross says, the Guardians guard the free will distortion of the mind-body-spirit complexes of third density on this planetary sphere. The events which require activation of quarantine were interfering with the free will distortion of mind-body-spirit complexes. And this is referring, if you remember from session 12, I believe we talked about quarantine, and this was established because of the transfer of Mars here. So go check that out if you haven't already, so you get a little bit of an idea of how the quarantine was established. But now we're talking about the free will interference, or the possible free will interference of this mechanism between the Orion group, which we're going to cover next, and the planetary entities here. So let's go on. I may be wrong, but it seems to me that it would be the free will of, say, the Orion group to interfere. How is this balanced against the other concept you just gave? And Ross says, the balancing is from dimension to dimension. The attempts of the so-called crusaders to interfere with free will are acceptable upon the dimension of their understanding. However, the mind-body-spirit complexes of this dimension you call third form a dimension of free will which is not able to, shall we say, recognize in full the distortions towards manipulation. Thus, in order to balance the dimensional variances in vibration, a quarantine was set up. This being a balancing situation whereby the free will of the Orion group is not stopped but given a challenge. Meanwhile, the third density group is not hindered from free choice. And this explains a little bit the reason why the quarantine, the planet, it was because of the transfer, like we just alluded before. And that quarantine is just set to prevent the access of negative influence into the planet. It's almost like a balancing mechanism that they created because of the transfer, I suppose, which was an interference of free will per se by the Confederation of Planets, with a good intention just to save the Mars souls that they incarnated here. So that's where everything is basically setting up the idea of the quarantine itself. One thing that's important to note is that the Orion group actually acts against the free will of people in different ways, but because of the extreme sensitivity that the entities had here, they had to quarantine even more and allow still the Orion group to influence and interfere the free will, but without giving too much away the free choice that the entities of this planet should have had here. So that's basically it. Let's go to the next question. Don says, could these windows that occurred let the Orion group come through once in a while? Does this have anything to do with the free will distortion? Ross says, this is correct. Could you tell me how that works? The closest analogy would be a random number generator within certain limits. What is the source of this random number generator? Is it created by the Guardians to balance their guarding, or is it a source other than the Guardians? And here we go with a full explanation. All sources are one. However, we understand your query. The window phenomenon is an other self phenomenon from the Guardians. It operates from the dimensions beyond space-time in what you may call the area of intelligent energy. Like your cycles, such balancing, such rhythms are as a clock striking. In the case of the windows, no entities have the clock. Therefore, it seems random. It is not random in the dimension which produces this balance. That is why we stated the analogy was within certain limits. This is something a little bit complicated, even for me, and I must confess, the way I understand it, because first is the source of these windows of time that Don is asking, which allow the Orion group to kind of like circumvent the quarantine itself. Those random windows, like Ra said here, are almost like a random number generator because it's operating from a different dimension. What dimension is this? The first time I read it, I thought it was time-space, but I don't believe it's time-space because that's something that Ra talks about a lot, and it does have access, or entities have access to time-space. So as they compare this with the rhythms of the cycles that we run through, and this being the galaxy itself, the planets, the stars, having their own geometry, moving around in space, in the universe, those are almost like laws that have been implemented by the creator itself, but operate under certain parameters that we are not able to see. I'm not sure if Ra knows about it or not, but it seems to be like that's where the mechanism is basically set on. And it creates this random windows by which the Orion group can just open through, say, a portal and come through and break quarantine. Not just the Orion group, but other entities as well. So it's, again, this is kind of fuzzy, for me. So I have to be honest. This is the best explanation I got for this. And I mean, honestly, it sounds a lot like the rhythms, like they say, of the universe itself. And it's something that we don't have access to. And nobody seems to have access to this random number generator of actually just the rhythm by which, this punctures in the quarantine happen. So hope it makes sense. It does make a little bit of sense to me. If you have anything to add, please add it to the comment section, because this is something that it feels a little loose to me even. So let's go on. Don asks, then this window balancing prevents the Guardians from reducing their positive polarization by totally eliminating the Orion contact through shielding. Is this correct? This is partially correct. In effect, the balancing allows an equal amount of positive and negative influx. This balanced by the mind-body-spirit distortions of the social complex. Thus, in your particular planetary sphere, less negative, as you would call it, information or stimulus is necessary than positive due to the somewhat negative orientation of your social complex distortion. Okay. So this is the balancing that naturally happens and what guides, the balance itself. It depends on how much is allowed into the planet as an influence itself. And because we don't want to have a skewed balance, I would say, of positive and negative, this is kind of always measuring how much of an influence we have. And as Ra is saying here, and this is 1981, it's still pretty current, I believe. Right now, there's a lot of negative influence on the planet, so that's why they say that it's less negative. Like, we need less negative influence at this point than positive. So again, this is just the way things balance in a third density planet, because it needs to have both philosophies. Say, I like to call it the Orion philosophy and the Jesus philosophy, service to others and service to self. That influence, that philosophy needs to be available, but it cannot be too imbalanced, so just people don't have the possibility of choice without looking at the manipulation of others, which is recognizing basically, if you want to polarize towards the negative or the positive. There's no battle there. I mean, it's just a love kind of battle that exists, whether you want to love others or you want to love yourself, and it's perfectly fine. But it seems that choice is very confusing right now, so we need a little bit more balancing. And well, another point that they say here, and it's important to mention, is that it depends on our social complex distortion, meaning that what we want also calls upon this energy, whether that be positive or negative. And subconsciously, a lot of people are following this, I like to call it the corporate structure, because it's a hierarchy type of level, that exists within the Orion Group's philosophy. And, it's our calling that basically summons or invokes this energy to be part of the influence of the collective consciousness, if you will. So that's important to keep in mind. Have positive thoughts. Don't think of the negative self or the negative side of the self if you're service to others in that regard. If not, then just keep contributing to the negative energy. I'm not here to judge. So let's go on. Don asks, in this way, total free will is balanced so that the individual may have an equal opportunity to choose service to others or service to self. Is this correct? This is correct, and we just talked about this. This is a minor question further to make an example of this principle. But if the Confederation landed on Earth, they would be taken as gods, breaking the law of free will and thus reducing their polarization towards service to all. I assume that the same thing would happen if the Orion Group landed. How would this affect their polarization towards service to self if they were able to land and become known as gods? Ra explains, in the event of mass landing of the Orion Group, the effect of polarization would be strongly towards an increase in the service to self, precisely the opposite of the former opportunity which you mentioned. Okay, so let me unscramble this right here. Don is asking if, say, the Confederation of Planets landed here, they would be losing a lot of polarization because people would regard them as gods, meaning that they would see them superior. And that is not the philosophy of the positive service to others oriented entities. Why? Because we want to see each other as equal. Unity, right? So the Confederation of Planets or any other that would land here, specifically Ra, who did this a while ago and they were regarded as gods, in a way, they lost polarization because of it, trying to help. And this happens over and over again. This is the way they lose polarization, positive. However, as Ra is saying, the negatives do the opposite. If they were to land here and sort of just be seen as gods, then they would be getting a lot of polarization because that's their philosophy. They want to be regarded as gods. They want to be, in their hierarchy. And I mean, the corporate structure that I keep mentioning, which is actually just in religion institutes and education systems and so on. I mean, you can see this in our society all over the place. It's the Orion's philosophy that we live here, not a service to others for sure. So you can see that anybody, a president, a governor, or a Vatican entity or whoever, they love to be regarded as somebody superior. So imagine the Orion Group, receiving this. So this is what actually happens. But the next question is really, really cool. So let's jump into that one too. Don asks, if the Orion Group was able to land, would this increase their polarization? What I'm trying to get at is it better for them to work behind the scenes and get recruits, shall we say, from our planet, the person on our planet going towards service to self, strictly on his own using his free will? Or is it just as good for the Orion Group to land upon our planet and demonstrate remarkable powers and get people like that? Ra says, the first instance is, in the long run, shall we put it, more salubrious for the Orion Group in that it does not infringe upon the law of one by landing, and thus does its work through those of this planet. In the second circumstance, a mass landing would create a loss of polarization due to the infringement upon the free will of the planet. However, it would be a gamble. If the planet then were conquered and become part of the empire, the free will would then be re-established. This is restrained in action due to the desire of the Orion Group to progress towards the one creator. This desire to progress inhibits the group from breaking the law of Confucian. Big point here now that we need to discuss. If the Orion Group were to land here and be regarded as gods, then yes, they would be be polarizing towards their negative orientation there. However, they're playing or gambling to come here because it's easier for them and a lot safer, not to lose polarization, to play behind the scenes, which is exactly what they have been using in our planet for thousands of years. They have been influencing people to create this structure of royalty, and I mean, I think I just covered that. But you can see in all the powers and all the hierarchies that exist in our societies, that's the Orion group, and that's what they have been doing. Basically manipulating the ones at the top, and the ones at the top do their bidding. No loss of polarization. It's not their act is really onto the other ones. So say, you know, the Roman emperors back then, or the British Empire over, you know, the long run, and now, you know, our government systems, the religion. So all of those have been doing the Orion group's bidding, not strictly directly from them, but, you know, just by manipulation. So that's how it works. And the other one is for them to land here, but they would be risking a lot of loss of polarization for, say, people like us, who would probably recognize it and say, no thank you, you are no gods, we are all gods. And they would be losing a lot of polarization by just trying to infringe upon our free will. That's how I perceive it. I hope it makes sense. It makes sense to me, and I think that's it. So let's move to the next question. You mentioned the word empire in relation to the Orion group. I have thought for some time that the movie Star Wars was somehow an allegory, in part for what is actually happening. Is this correct? Ross says, this is correct in the same way that a simple children's story is an allegory for physical, philosophical, social, complex distortion understanding. So I think it's pretty funny that they mentioned Star Wars here, because we know from the Orion group and from Corey Good's information and other insiders that the Orion group is part of the Dark Fleet, which is something that they have discussed a lot by the Nazi Germany that created the secret space program here and became this runaway society. And because of that, we have information. It's pretty cool, actually. And you can see this ship right here from Star Wars that is very well known. And this is another ship that was rendered by the people that have seen and have been insiders from the secret space program, and looks exactly like the one in Star Wars. So I think it was pretty cool that Don asked that question without even knowing at all that, you know, these are the ships that the Orion group use, and it's one of the biggest ones, and it's also part of the Star Wars movie. Again, there's a lot of information there about insiders and how people get this information and so on, but I just thought that was cool. Just wanted to share that, and that's it. Let's move to the next question. Is there a harvest of entities oriented towards service to self, like there is a harvest here of entities oriented towards service to others? Ra says, there is one harvest. Those able to enter 4 density through vibrational complex levels may choose the manner of their further seeking of the one creator. Alright, pretty simple. This is just one question. It does seem, you know, like we can think that there are 2 harvests, but like we know, and I'll reiterate here if you haven't watched in the other videos, there is only one harvest, and that harvest actually just takes all the entities and divide them. Those who go to positive 4 density will remain on this planet or move to another 4 density planet, their choice. Those of 4 density negative will be moved to another planet of 4 density, not this one, because this planet is polarizing for the positive. So negatives, they get out, positives stay here. And those who need to repeat 3rd density will be moved to another planet for sure, because this planet after the harvest will not be inhabitable by any 3rd density being. So just recap there. I think it was appropriate for this question, and I'll leave you with that. Let's go to one of the last questions, where he says, then as we enter the 4 density, there will be a split, shall we say, and part of the individuals who go into 4 density will go to planets or places where there is service to others, and the other part will go into places where there is service to self. Is this correct? This is correct. I just mentioned that. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Last question is, well, the Confederation established its quarantine, I understand, 75,000 years ago. Has the Orion Group been attempting to contact any part of this planet prior to that? Or did they? How long have they been attempting to contact this planet? Here we go. Approximately 45,000 years ago, an attempt was made. It was not successful. Approximately 2,600 years ago, the group sent an entity of social memory complex to this planetary sphere. This effort met with some success, but was in the space-time continuum lessened in impact. Since approximately 2,300 years ago, in your measurement, this group has constantly been working upon the harvest, just as the Confederation. This is beautiful to end this video because they're talking about the Orion Group sending an entity which was a social memory complex actually 3,600 years ago. Let me make the notation here. I put the text as it comes out of the book, but they made a change. I think it's in session 17. They corrected the mistake by 1,000 years. So it wasn't 2,600 years ago, but 3,600 years ago. So the point is that they sent an entity here of social memory complex, and that entity is, spoiler alert, Yahweh. And it's the biblical God that is regarded as the one God, the unnamed, you know, the whole thing. So we're going to touch on that next week when we do part 2. But one thing that is cool to say is that they have been working on the harvest as well. Now, I like to think, and I'll just share this, you know, my thoughts, especially when reading, you know, the opposite side of us. Remember, we don't challenge or battle at all the negative oriented people or entities at any point, even if they are from fifth density. We don't. We send them love. We actually regard them as our lost brothers, and they have been working on this planet to also harvest entities for the negative, as hard as the Confederation of Planets have been doing. So I think it's pretty cool to know just that those entities who we deem negative here are just part of ourselves that have been lost in their seeking of love and the one creator. And it's kind of like said here, you know, that they have been constantly working on this harvest, just like the Confederation. And it kind of puts them both into perspective to know that they are both, you know, looking for that one love that they believe on. One is love for others, the other one is love for self. But in the end, it's just love for the creator, because we are all the same creator in our independent thoughts. And the last thing I'll say to that, for some gratefulness for the negative entities and the Orion Group itself to exist, is that because of them, we can actually polarize even more and accelerate our evolution process, thanks to the societal system that we have and that we so much despise. We just need to see it with love. And I know this is something hard for people to do. It's hard for myself, but I'm in this path and I just wanted to share that. All right, so part 2 of session 16 is going to be about biblical references. I'm not going to go too much ahead of myself. Of course, you can always read the content and the material there, but that's all I got for this quarantine. We talk a little bit about harvest and other little stuff. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for all of you who have been subscribing and liking the video, making comments. Really caters to my heart to know that there's people out there who enjoy not only the Law of One, but just my content in general and my rambling about this. So again, all my love to you. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in part 2 of session 16.